Welcome to another episode of Gung Ho. It's October 20th, 2022, and my friend Jim Henry's back. He's been on the show, I think, many times on different issues, mostly about Trump and Zeldin. So we're going to talk about Zeldin today, because the election is coming up, and his relationship with Trump. And Jim is sort of the expert in that area, but I'm going to say a few things. So, do you want me to start, or you want?
No, you go ahead. I'm glad to be here, and it's a critical election. We got, a lot of people are concerned now because Zeldin is running for governor of New York, and he's not doing badly in the polls. This is supposed to be a Democratic state, but he's creeping up close to Governor Hochul, and it may be a surprise if we don't have voters turn out in force on November 8th. That's the key thing. What is the turnout? New York is naturally a Democratic state, but a lot of people are just tuned out of politics this time around, and I'm worried that it could backfire.
All right. Well, one of my issues with him is claiming that he's a veteran and supports veterans. You know, everybody supports veterans. But I did a little digging about his military records, and I've got a copy of one of them. And it turns out that Zeldin never did a tour overseas. He was in Iraq for 37 days, and I don't know if you know this about him. He went to college, and he went to law school before he went in the service. So he was already, they would commission you a captain. And every photograph I see of him, he's in the rear. You can't see this, but he's in the rear. He's in a big room. Every photograph I see of him, he's in the rear. He's in a big room. Sometimes he's armored up. He's dry. He's clean. He's smiling. This guy's never been outside the wire. 37 days is pathetic. You really can't say he's a veteran. You could say he supports veterans. The other thing he doesn't have, which is very important, is what they call the combat action badge. Anybody that's been in combat gets that badge. That's a very, very valuable badge. Mm-hmm. And anybody in the rear, they don't get it. We call them rear echelon, mother, whatever. So that's one thing. Another thing, he's about his relationship with vets. He takes credit for putting that VA clinic in Riverhead, or some credit, which is absolutely ridiculous because he was not on the scene. It was Tim Bishop that did that. I was there for the opening, and I was very close with Tim Bishop. Very close.
Well, there's a lot of areas where he's a hypocrite.
Yes.
You take the area of gun control, and he's talking about crime as being a big problem in New York State. At the same time, he's in favor of concealed carry. He endorsed the Supreme Court's decision, which is making it very difficult for New York to have any kind of gun control. Last year, gun sales in the U.S. were up 19%, 39.7 million gun sales in 1 year. And a lot of them didn't have background checks. And those are just the ones we know about from the FBI. Well, how does Zeldin feel about that? That's one of the key drivers for the increased crime rate. I can't understand how the police unions that are supporting him down the line practically are, sort of ignoring his record on gun control. But on the other hand, he's against abortion. So in one area of the world, he wants to give people all the choice they want. Buy a gun if you want one, carry a concealed weapon, it's up to you, no problem. In the area of women's rights, I don't know how he feels about his daughters being not able to, have access to health care or choice if there was a rape or something, God forbid, happens. But I know how I feel about my daughter. I want her to have all the medical care in the world, and it's really her decision about the access to abortion. But in that area, he wants the state to tell us what to do. Okay, gun control.
With women's bodies.
With women's bodies. Gun control, you're on your own, perfect libertarian, On this area, he's an authoritarian. So I have a hard time seeing, yes, you mentioned his service in Iraq was very brief and limited. He claims to be a big advocate of veterans' rights. You know, he hasn't been very generous to the VA hospital system when it came time to vote budgets for the VA. And then we get to the issue of inflation, which is his other favorite topic. He doesn't want to talk about Donald Trump, who he supported down the line. But the fact is, where do we get all this inflation? Well, 4 years Trump was in office. He did nothing to reform the economy. He made a massive tax cut in 2017, December 2017, without even a Senate debate or any hearings on this bill. More than $2 trillion of increased U.S. debt because of this massive corporate tax cut, put something like $900 billion in the hands of the top 100 corporations in the United States, and we didn't pay for it. Well, it's not surprising that that kind of stimulus, plus all the money we spent on the pandemic, which Republicans also supported, you know, would create an inflationary problem. Well, the other problem feeding inflation is, of course, energy prices and what Putin has been doing in the Ukraine, and just working with OPEC to raise prices just last week. Well, who was Donald Trump's biggest supporter in the international community? It was Vladimir Putin. Did we hear, Lee Zeldin denouncing Trump's foreign policy when it came to Putin? No, he basically sided with almost everything Donald Trump did right down the line. And we know, if I have researched carefully, there was a whole lot of connection between Russian finance and the rise of Donald Trump. So, there's many areas in which Lee Zeldin falls short, but when you look at his two critical issues, inflation and gun control and crime in New York State, that's where he's really only wants to talk about that. Both of those issues.
I know a little bit about gun control. I know this, that most of the serious crimes committed with small arms, those small arms come from out of state. They come from out of state because there's not proper regulation.
Yeah.
A person out of state could go into a gun store and buy a weapon every day, and no one keeps track. And that's why all of a sudden they find somebody and they have an arsenal in their home. Because the government, nobody, local, state, federal, does not keep track on how many weapons people buy. And they don't keep track on the inventory that the gun shops have. So this is basic stuff. How could you let someone walk in a gun shop and continually buy semi-automatic weapons? It's like assault weapons. But this is what happens.
And we have all these school shootings. I don't remember Lee Zeldin saying anything about the school shootings, any one of them that has ever occurred. In this country, there's about 400 million weapons outstanding in the public right now. About 70% of those weapons are owned by about 30 million people who own an average of 10 weapons each. And then there's the rest of us who are hunters, and we go, occasional duck shooting and that kind of thing. And that's fine. Nobody wants to take away those gun rights. But the big abuses we're seeing in the area of where people without any background checks are able to get access to assault rifles. Ask Lee Zeldin the next time he appears in public, do you support a ban on assault weapons? And you'll see, and he'll have to say no. The same way Donald Trump backed the NRA's, got a lot of money from the NRA.
How do you think these manufacturers were able to get away with, selling us?
This is a huge business. I mean,
assault weapons.
They soared. The stock prices of all the gun manufacturers in the United States have soared in the last 5 years under Donald Trump, and the weapon sales have taken off. Zeldin has no response to that because, he just wants to talk about crime in general. Well, it's not crime, it's guns.
Yeah. People use weapons to commit crimes, and because they are able to, nobody really stops them. and that those assault weapons, they are having a deadly effect on our children. Almost every time someone does a mass shooting, they have an AR-15, which is just a knockoff from the M16. And you could fire every time you pull your trigger finger, you fire a round. You could do that quite often. So anyhow, all right, another thing about him, Steve Bannon. He's very close with Steve Bannon. In fact, I remember during one of his campaigns, he had a fundraiser in Manhattan, and the guest speaker, the main speaker, was Steve Bannon. And I think I'm right now. This guy is on his way to jail.
Well, he's been convicted twice. The first time he was pardoned by Donald Trump. He's also been tagged with a big lawsuit involving, speaking of veterans, I mean, ripping off the fund that he set up to build the wall, was directed at veterans, and the money disappeared, more than $25 million. And Bannon just can't account for it. So, I think, the fact is that Bannon was out here fundraising. They're very close to this group.
They did this in Manhattan, this fundraiser.
Yeah, no, it was Beck Mercer, Rebecca Mercer, the owner of Renaissance Technologies, Robert Mercer. I know a lot about him. We could talk about those guys forever.
Does that say something about Zeldin's character?
Well, I think Zeldin is basically receiving money from a lot of people who are very, very bad people and are deeply implicated in international chicanery of all kinds. The Mercers funded Cambridge Analytica, this big spy group that was involved in hacking elections. They've been supporting people like Eric Prince, who is this mercenary, and Bannon. He was a big recipient of Mercer funding. And so Zeldin is just one of the kind of apostles that they've chosen.
Didn't he vote to overturn the election, the presidential election?
Well, I think that there was a statement that he made on the day of January 6th, in which he said basically, Trump is just representing a lot of people whose values I agree with. And, no, he didn't have any, he did not use the opportunity to denounce what was going on. He did say later he didn't think Trump was responsible for the violence, and he kind of gave him a, sort of a...
So he basically supported what happened on January 6th.
He never denounced it, and he never attributed anything.
He didn't denounce it. Silence
he never
is
announced
guilt.
it. He never announced it, and he voted against having an independent investigation. He's kind of gone quiet on the whole Trump relationship because it's toxic for him. The more you know about that relationship, you know that he was very much assisted by Donald Trump.
What about his record on the votes that came up involving Obamacare or Medicare?
Was terrible. I mean, he votes with the right wing in the Republican Party in the Congress down the line. He's also been kind of a warmonger when it comes to, let's go break up the treaty with Iran. And
I could tell you a little bit about that.
And we know a lot about that. I mean, basically, if you want to go to war with Iran, I would have thought the last thing in the world the United States needs is another war in the Middle East.
I know that he has written about basically starting a war with Iran, which I think is crazy. Starting a war with Iran. He wants us with our allies to take out their nuclear facilities. What do you think they're going to do about that? You don't think that's a war? Another war?
Well, it's hard to sympathize with Iran. I mean, we have protesters.
But you don't want to
in the streets. No, we have protesters in the streets trying to get rid of that regime. I don't think we have to have a war with Iran.
No.
That would, if you wanted to preserve the regime in Iran, you would have a war with them because that would unify everybody to support the Iranian people would then come together and say we're being attacked by the United States. That's the last thing in the world we need to do right now. What we need to do is stand back and watch the Iranians reform their own country.
That's why I call him the Zealot. Advocating taking out Iran's nuclear facilities. Yes? Then what? Then what?
Well, I don't think, there's a whole technical discussion about that, but basically we got way off track when they canceled that treaty Russia's now supporting Iran, that's getting all these drones from Iran. We basically have really gotten ourselves into a mess with the policies that Trump initiated with respect to Iran. But Zeldin wasn't ahead of the game there. He was behind everything that Trump did.
Yes.
I mean, when Trump met with Putin, and had those conferences and came out saying, he basically believed everything Vladimir Putin was saying, that would have been an opportunity for someone like Zeldin to stand up in Congress and say, I don't agree with that. I'm an independent Republican. Didn't do it, because he's really beholden to the people around Donald Trump and the people like Robert Mercer for his political career, Steve Bannon. These are, they swim in the same water.
What we're getting is a very small version of Trump. That's what we're getting with him.
Well, I think that in some ways, he's more dangerous than Trump, because let's say he becomes governor of New York. The governor of New York has enormous power. I mean, we've architected the state government so that the governor has a lot of administrative power. He basically can decide whether, in conjunction with the New York Assembly, Speaker of the New York Assembly, whether to hold hearings on a particular issue. He can, it's just Governor Hochul back in May decided on her own authority to basically give a huge grant to a fab plant manufacturer in upstate New York. I mean, there's a lot of problems with the Democratic Party. I'm not saying that they have clean hands here, but I'm saying compared to having Zeldin running this New York State Authority and having women's rights in jeopardy and having no gun control, I mean, that's just the worst thing imaginable.
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to realize he's not for us, and he should not be representing us anywhere, anytime.
Everything depends on turnout, Joe. If we don't get a high turnout on the part of, first and foremost, not only women, but of course those who have daughters, anyone with a daughter, including Zeldin. I mean, I'm curious to ask Representative Zeldin how, if his own daughters were confronted with the kind of dilemma that many young women are when they've seen a rape or incest, how he would respond. Because under the current bills that he has supported, abortion under any conditions would be unlawful. And that's just a horrific situation to imagine.
Well, they say that issue is motivating not only women, but young people across the board coming out.
I think young people ought to be concerned about this, because
about our rights.
About our rights. I mean, Roe v. Wade was 1973. We kind of got used to taking it for granted. It has to be defended in every generation, and most of us are way beyond childbearing age, but we have young people who are dependent on us to defend those rights, and that's where we have to speak up, because this is just unconscionable.
Yes, young people are way ahead of us when we talk about human rights, individual rights. They're beyond us.
And climate change. That's another issue that Zeldin has nothing to say about, nothing to offer. It's like the world can go on emitting carbon, and he has, like most Republicans, he has, far closer to the fossil fuel industry and to the people who run the oil industry in terms of taking donations and money. He'll do nothing to help the United States.
Anything about voting rights in him, about the restricting of voting rights across the country?
He's had nothing to say. He didn't ever criticize the claims that, the spurious claims, 50 court cases have been tossed out that were filed by the Trump backers who are claiming the 2020 election was rigged. No evidence for it ever, not anything concrete. Did he denounce that? Did he say, yeah? I think he now quietly admits that the 2020 election was legitimate. But, this is just very late in the day to be saying that.
He actually said that?
In the last few weeks, he's been asked about it, and he apparently quietly sort of said, well, I concede that it was legitimate. But, that's because that whole position has been so discredited that it's only really diehard, sort of right-wing Trump people that really
So New York
take
has
that position.
New York has been basically known as a Democratic state. He does not fit in this at all. I mean, it's so.
Well, since I would say since the 1950s, we basically had more or less quite a long run of Democratic governors. We had George Pataki, who was a liberal Republican, and he said that he thought Zeldin was making a huge mistake by not dissociating himself from Donald Trump. Pataki is one of the few Republicans who's spoken out against Zeldin, but I'm sad to see that the Republican Party has become kind of this mob that's very authoritarian.
Well, I'm banking on that there are a lot of good people, especially Democrats, that will vote Democratic, will not vote for him in no way. He's not qualified, and he doesn't have the qualifications to be our leader. He doesn't have the integrity, the character. He's not there for us.
Well, if you were in favor of war, let's put it this way: if you want to see another war and another whole generation of Americans wasting their blood in the Middle East, if you want to see, women's rights, all the struggles that we've gone through for 50 years, just thrown away, all that progress, all the progress we've made in civil rights, all the progress we're making on climate change. If you want to see any chance of getting our control over the gun situation, which is just totally out of control, I can't imagine you'd vote for this guy.
Well, I got a card today in the mail, actually on my stoop, said vote, just vote. And if the turnout, they say, is good or exceptional, it always favors the Democrats. Am I right about that?
If we have turnout from the people who are registered Democrats and the numbers that they could amount to, it should go the right way. And I'm not a registered Democrat. I want to see independents also rise up and see that this guy's a threat. It isn't just a Democrat versus Republican. Democrats have a lot of issues. And this is just not an issue that's going to stop with the election. The elections come and go, but we have to organize to make people understand climate.
I hear people
guns.
say Democrats.
Right.
I'm a Democrat. I don't have a party.
Right. I'm a Democrat. I'm not a member of any organized political
Listen,
group.
people, I know you see this painting behind me. It's a painting of several surfers. I'm in the center, and one of my friends actually painted that. Victor Pell, the guy with the hood. That was done in 1993. We were just coming out of the water from ditch. I've never mentioned much about surfing, but surfing played a big part in my life, especially when I came back from Vietnam, because we had no safety nets. We didn't know what to do, literally. So guys that were into sports, like surfing, whatever it was, any kind of sport, they would take that sport up again. And what we didn't realize at the time is we were giving ourselves self-therapy. And surfing played a big part in my life, getting me through some really bad years. I didn't even realize it, what I was doing, but I was healing. So,
well, if we'd had a VA system that was able to help you with PSTD and other issues.
well, there was no such thing.
There was no such thing, so that's what we're talking about. We have, in this country, the most costly medical system on the planet per capita, with the least good performance in terms of outcomes. And, that's a whole area that we haven't talked about.
You wrote about this, the Army coming back from Vietnam.
Discarded Army. And the VA was shameful the way they treated returning vets. And, Nader and I did a book together on that. It was,
You did that in 1974. You were writing about.
Yeah, we published that in '74. Paul Starr, who went on to win a Pulitzer Prize, he's at Princeton. Ray Bonner, who was the other guy who was on the book, he's an ex-Marine.
Well, what they did to us, like I said, there's no such thing as post-traumatic stress disorder. We didn't know about Agent Orange.
Right.
There was nothing. You just came out of the jungle, flew home, and that was it. Boom.
Yeah.
Duh.
Well, I think every major war has seen people, they just didn't diagnose it, and they didn't have the treatment. And there are a lot of people, especially Republicans, who are not interested in funding the VA because it's actually a fairly successful example of socialized medicine,
Yes.
It actually works. And it's not perfect by any means, but, it's kind of.
It works. It's not perfect.
Basically works.
But people, like you said, don't realize that the VA system is completely socialistic. It's, that's what it is.
For example, in the case of the prices that the VA pays versus Medicare for pharmaceuticals, the VA is allowed to negotiate with the drug manufacturers.
Veterans get their meds for nothing.
Yeah. Well, since 2005, under Bush, the Republican, they put in a ban on having the Medicare system negotiate drug prices.
But that's going to change.
Well, it's supposed to change now under Biden, but it's cost us $200 billion a year of excessive costs for prescription drugs through the Medicare system. It's been going on for 15 years, and that's a hell of a lot of money. And the Republicans supported that down the line. So, I think a lot of Democrats also were lobbying for that provision as well. So it's not a case of one party over another. But
we only have about 20 seconds to go. All right, you know where we stand, how we stand. Stand with us.
And vote.
And vote. This guy Zeldin is not for us.
He is a
Not
zealot.
for anyone.
He is a zealot.
He's a zealot.
You just have to understand his positions, and then you'll get to the polls.
Every one of his position is opposed to us doing the right thing, doing the good thing for people. Every one of them. All right.
Good to be with you.
Winding down. I'll be talking more about surfing, surf stories. I'm one of the few people that actually surfed at China Beach during the war, one time.
Wow. You're lucky to be here, so good.
Well, nobody was sniping at me when I was surfing. It was a secure area. All right. That's it, right?
Old time. Where have my old friends gone? Where are they now? Used to be a walk